Good evening. I have one panelist that's gone missing, is in a different, wait a minute. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I apologize for getting a little bit of a slow start here. One of my panelists has accidentally gone on to a different link, and hopefully they'll join us shortly. I did send out a follow-up email hoping that they would find me on the right um, link. And so without further ado, we will get going here. Just a moment. It's not that one. Just a sec. Okay. So, hi, Andrew. I can see you on the chat, on the YouTube chat. Andrew Hoff says, Skip, your reading of Pythia P's Edinger interview last night was monumental for me. Yesterday's words can't explain. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Andrew. I have created a separate channel that is called the Political Psychology Channel. And so I hope that you can find that. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Let's see. Okay. All right. So this is the link to the Political Psychology channel. I've also done some reading of Pythia's book, America on the Couch, on that channel, and I'm just getting that channel functional at this point. And so I would appreciate if you would go over and join that channel and subscribe there and watch for more of my readings of Pythia's work over there, because that's where I'm planning to read it. Although today I got my copy of the Federalist Papers by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, and I may read some sections of the Federalist Papers. I have to first figure out if I have a magnifying glass because the print is really small. But in any case, I'm glad to have your comment. I think it's a very powerful interview that she did with Edward Edinger. And of course, he predicted a lot of the things that we're now seeing in our politics more than 21 years ago, because he died 21 years ago. But without further ado, I see that we have several folks watching, and I don't want to keep you. What I want to do is, because my panelists have not arrived, I am going to go ahead and run this session as I used to without panelists. And if my panelists arrive, then we can adjust then. But in any case, I'm reading from this article entitled, let me just get back to the original page here. Okay, so it's this article. It's entitled Carl Gustav Jung, Quantum Physics and the Spiritual Mind um, this, wait a minute, a mystical vision of the 21st century. And so it's important to understand what these authors mean by that. But I think that the most interesting aspect of it, leaving aside spirituality, is the comparison between Jungian psychology and quantum physics, because I think many people in the United States and around the world, presumably, are still back in Newtonian physics, and they don't realize that we've gone far beyond Newtonian physics at this point. And Newtonian physics served us quite well for several hundred years, but then the quantum physicists came along and changed the way we have to think about the world. And so we need to have new ways of thinking about it. Winston's mom says, "Good evening, everyone. Good evening." Conover of reading. I have not had a chance to discuss the Red Book purchase yet, but I will be replying in email soon. Okay, terrific. Um, be happy to talk to you. Um, and Dan is talking about quantum computers. Uh, that is a quantum computers is a specialty feature within um, quantum physics, of course. And basically, if a particle is entangled in quantum physics, if a particle is entangled, then it's always going to have a certain face toward the world. And uh, if I understand correctly, if you're able to chain up like 40 um, entangled particles, you can basically make a supercomputer, and you can have it operate at huge distance, I mean, across the galaxy type things. And so here is QI Critical here to challenge my information about quantum physics, which I know precious little about, except for what I've read in these books. And I did get the book. I'm going to read you a little portion of it a little later on this evening. The book is called Infinite Potential, and what quantum physics reveals about how we should live. Um, that's the main book that's being referred to in this essay. Um, so Winston's mom hadn't just settled on how to address me, so played with my name. Should I type Mr. Dr. Mr. What do you prefer to be addressed as? I think Skip is perfectly fine. I'm not trying to hold out any great credential here, because first of all, I'm not a trained psychologist, except by my own training, by my own self-study for the last over 30 years. And um, basically, the Jungian analysts have kept Jungian psychology pretty tightly bottled up for a long while. And so QI Critical, you can tell me who Terrence Howard is. I'm not familiar with that name. Um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start reading some of these sections, and we can have a conversation about them. And so I'm in the midst of reading this article, um, which is about Jung and quantum physics and spirituality, and I'm into part 5 now. And part 5 is entitled Eddington's Views of a Conscious Universe. In the 1930s, Sir Arthur Stanley Eddington, a prominent British astrophysicist, was one of the first physicists who systematically searched for aspects of consciousness in the universe. concluding that the universe is of the nature of a thought or sensation in a universal mind. One of Eddington's arguments was based on the fact that when physicists make measurements, their observations make sense because the measuring instruments are connected with a meaningful background of the objects that are being measured. For example, when we observe the movement of a light dot through the sky at night, our observations make sense because we know the planetary background where the planets revolve about the sun. In this situation, Eddington pointed out, observations of atoms are a problem because their background isn't known. Whenever we see an atom, we can see phenomena that occur at their surface. Um, okay, we can see phenomena that occur at their surface, but we don't know what happens inside. Why is the background of atoms not known and even unknowable? Because, for example, as we've described above, the electrons in atoms are non-material, non-empirical forms, and we don't know what that means. Now we realize, Eddington wondered, that science has nothing to say as to the intrinsic nature of the atom. If science has nothing to say about the building blocks of the physical world, of the visible world, it is a problem that must be addressed. As it turns out, it isn't the only puzzle of its kind. A similar situation arises, for example, in neurology, where no measurements of the surface of a brain can where no measurements of the surface of a brain can tell us what is going on in the mind behind it. In spite of this similarity, watching a brain is fundamentally different from watching an atom. This is so because behind the surface of a brain there is a mind and a person who can tell what is going on in this mind. In contrast, atoms aren't connected with elementary persons who live inside and can tell us what is going on behind the surface. Nevertheless, Eddington suggested thinking of the two situations together, that of the brain and that of the atom, and he concluded that the background of atoms is mind-like, since we need something to which we can attach the measurements of an atom. Quote, why not then attach it to something of spiritual nature, of which a prominent characteristic is thought? It seems rather silly to prefer to attach it to something of a so-called concrete nature, inconsistent with thought, and then to wonder where the thought comes from, unquote. Okay, so the point is, and this is a point that I've been making about artificial intelligence, is we are a very far way from having artificial intelligence that can replace human beings. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have computers that can destroy us all. Certainly, we've had that for at least a half a century and maybe more. And if we make a mistake in programming, we can destroy the world. And not only we can, but many other countries can. But my issue is this issue, which is that um, if you hook someone up to a brain scan, you can tell in what part of the brain something is happening, but you have no idea what's happening beyond the surface. And this is exactly what Dr. Schäfer has said. And so, for example, if you hook me up and I dream, you can see what parts of my brain are active during my dreaming. But until you can put my dream on the screen, um, you haven't replicated human intelligence. And the question is whether that could ever be done. I don't know. Maybe it can. But in the case, so Dr. Schäfer's point here, though, is that in the case of a human being, okay, I can be thinking about something, and I could be hooked up to electro encephalogram, I guess it is, and um, and I could be telling the researcher what I'm thinking about at any given moment, and he can see what part of my brain is activated during that process. But and also, if I'm sort of daydreaming, I could be describing my daydream, I suppose. Um, but an atom, we can't tell what's going on inside an atom, and that's the problem. So let's see. Uh, and so IQ Critical says, the actor who says he will open the flower of life. Okay, I don't know about that. Winston's, I listen to Terrence Howard, but he leans a bit on suggesting mind altering drugs. I prefer Alan Watts for that reason. I am not against holistic health, but it's not something I want to mess with. And there won't be any recommendation of mind altering drugs here because I find my own mind is altered enough without having to use any sorts of psychedelics. And if any of you have had a religious experience, then you know what I mean. You don't need to use psychedelics. I'm not saying that psychiatry won't use them, and obviously they are doing a lot of experimenting on these sorts of things. But I don't know anything about that. I can't recommend it, and I haven't had the need for it. And I've had plenty of really impressive experiences. Um, so QI says, "Wow, the atom was the beginning of human life." Well, maybe not, because there are particles smaller than atoms, and so we don't really know which came first, the atom or the quark, or the Higgs boson. Is it artificial or is our thought process now artificial? Well, I don't know. I mean, um, we don't really know how we think, I think. Dan says the limits of perception are the limits of scientific method. Fair enough. I agree with that. So, anyway, I'll go on with Dr. Schäfer. The last part of this statement is a surprise. We usually take our thinking for granted, and the thoughts in our mind tell us a lot of things, but they say nothing about where they are coming from. It is our mind an invention of our brain, or do we have a mind because the background of the universe is mind-like and expresses itself in our mind? To Eddington, the unity of the universe made it necessary to conclude that behind all empirical appearances of the world, there is a background continuous with the background of the brain. Unity in this context means coherence, that the universe is a coherent system can be suggested on the basis of the unity of our mind. If the unity of a man's consciousness is not an illusion, there must be some corresponding unity in the relations of the mind stuff, which is behind the visible surface of things. Thus, from our inner sense of unity, we infer the unity of the world. If the universe wasn't a coherent system, but a random collection of disconnected piles of material debris, the unity of our thinking would be an illusion. On the other hand, if the universe is a coherent whole, the existence of our personal mind suggests that the background of the universe is mind-like. Now, I would add to this that Michio Kaku, who's one of the famous physicists that sometimes appears on cable television, um, has said that every atom in the universe is connected to every other atom in the universe, and I think that's a fair enough statement. It would have to be. And good evening, Nick. Good to see you. The Fire I Can Recommend interview on Joe Rogan Experience with quantum physicist. He debunked all that nonsense. What's secret about? Okay, well, which interview fire are you talking about? If you want to recommend a link, we can all go look at it, but you haven't identified who was interviewed by Joe Rogan, and uh, we could use a link, and I will approve a link if you put it in there. Um, so anyway, um, in this way, Eddington was lead to the conclusion that the universe is of the nature of a thought or sensation in a universal mind. To put the conclusions crudely, the stuff of the world is mind stuff. As is often the way with crude statements, I shall have to explain that by mind, I do not here exactly mean mind, and by stuff, I do not at all mean stuff. Still, this is as near as we can get to the idea in a simple phrase. Okay, so this is Eddington talking. Eddington says, Eddington realized that his views were alien to physics. It is difficult of the matter. It is difficult for the matter of fact physicists to accept the view that the substratum of everything is of mental character. However, this is a problem of physics, not of Eddington's theses, and it shows the inability of the physical sciences to describe all the essential aspects of the universe. Okay, which I agree with because Newtonian physics is dependent upon the logos, and as we often talk here, there's uh, the psyche as well, and that was the area in which Dr. Jung was working. Okay, so the fire says Sean Carroll. Okay, well, we'll look that up at some point. Um, it's interesting. I've had a longtime friend named Sean Carroll, but I haven't seen him in 15 years, so maybe I should definitely look him up. Um, Even though they are controversial, Eddington's theses are in perfect agreement with Carl Gustav Jung's basic assumptions and with the quantum phenomena, which show us that there is a part of the world that we can't see, a background of potentiality that doesn't consist of things, but of forms. These forms are thought like, not thing like, and they are real because they actualize in the empirical world and act in it. As a matter of fact, the entire empirical world now appears to us as an emanation out of a realm of invisible forms. The agreement, if not identity, with Jung's basic theses is striking. Our conscious thinking is based on an emanation of forms out of a non personal, that is, cosmic realm. Consciousness is not sharply defined, Eddington explained, but fades into subconsciousness. And beyond that, we must postulate something indefinite but yet continuous with our mental nature. This I take to be the world stuff. We compare the mind stuff to our conscious feelings, Eddington concluded, because now that we are convinced of the formal and symbolic character of the entities of physics, there is nothing else to liken to it. Um, so, what I would say, the way I've gotten my mind around this, is that every iron atom um, recognizes every other iron atom, and so they will tend um, to glom together, or every other type of atom will hold together with its compatriots, and so in that sense, it is conscious, and so it's, or at least we could say, aware. I'm not saying it can do long division, but I am saying that it is conscious enough to pull together and ultimately form stars. And that's true of hydrogen and then helium and so on. As we know, we're in the third generation of star formation. So each time there's a supernova and the material of the star gets superheated and blown out into the universe, it contains different elements than were there when the first star was created. And so that's how we can have um, elements like gold and silver and uranium 235 on the Earth, because we are the result of three generations of those supernova, as I understand it. Winston's mom says, "Oh, leave the wise our measures to collate. One thing at least is certain, light has weight. One thing is certain, and the rest debate. Light rays, when near the sun, do not go straight." Arthur Eddington. Okay. At least he proved that for Einstein and got him his Nobel Prize, I think. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next thing. Which is part 6, entitled Quantum Physics is the Psychology of the Universe. An important concept in quantum chemistry is the concept of virtual states. Virtual states are the empty states of atoms and molecules. For a more detailed description of the concept of virtuality in chemistry, with additional examples, see Infinite Potential. That's this book, which I'm going to read from a little later. All atoms and molecules exist in quantum states. You can think of a molecule like a mountain range with countless hills and valleys. Each valley is an energy hole, which contains an energy ladder. The steps of these ladders represent fixed or quantized amounts of energy. They are the quantum states of a molecule. Each molecule must occupy one of its states. It must stand on one of the steps of its ladders so that a large number of states are empty. Quantum chemists call the empty states of things their virtual states. Virtual states are mathematical forms or patterns of information. They have the forms of waves, but these waves are invisible because they are empty. There is nothing there to see. But they are real and they truly exist, even though we can't see them, because a molecule can jump into such a state and make it a visible state. You can think of virtual states as the logical structure of a system, which contains its future empirical possibilities. All that a molecule can do is to jump from an occupied state into a virtual state. In an empirical science, the appearance of entities which have no matter, no energy, and are invisible is an embarrassment. You can very well compare the situation to Jung's thesis that behind our conscious thinking, there is a realm of unconscious forms. If you have to describe the world by referring to an invisible, numinous realm of reality, you are leaving the realm of empirical science. Thus, many of the pioneers of quantum physics tried to explain the virtual states away as mere constructs that don't really exist. However, we have no choice. We have to think that the empty states of atoms and molecules are real because they can control empirical phenomenon. For example, all chemical reactions are steered by the virtual states of the reacting molecules, which determine what kinds of molecules can form in a reaction. In specific types of reactions called redox reactions, the products appear with characteristic magnetic properties, which are determined by their virtual states. In addition, oxygen can serve our metabolism because it contains what chemists call degenerate states. Degenerate states, yeah, okay, we're all degenerate, I guess. Degenerate states are invisible, and yet they are the basis of the particular reactivity of oxygen. Um, and Fire says it's interesting how the physics is mixed with psychology here. Yeah, that's the point of this article. Um, Winston's mom and astrology. The fire. Jung wrote extensively on astrology. If we look to our 12 houses, we see in our first six ourself. Uh, this reminds me of a statement that sounds something like that. 99% of matter is pure void, emptiness of space. Well, it's interesting. I heard a interesting talk by Deepak Chopra, who wrote the introduction to this book, and he said that what he was saying is that we and everything that we can see and everything that's in Newtonian physics comes down to about 0.01% of all the things in the universe. He was pointing out that 70% of the universe is dark energy. And I think he said another 24% is dark matter, which physicists can't explain at all. And then there's, um, interstellar dust and so on. And so when you get down to things that we can actually see, um, then uh, then you're down to 0.01% of everything that's in the universe. So that's as much as we can actually explain. So it's a pretty humbling idea, actually. Um, and so anyway, um, so it goes on. There is no doubt invisible virtual states are real. Since their inner forms can affect visible phenomena, they must be truly existing, real entities. Molecules are guided in their actions by the waveforms of their virtual states, like by inner images. Okay, and inner images, of course, is where you get Jung. The concept of the inner images derives from psychology. Brain scientist Gerald Hunter calls inner images all that which is hidden behind. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Lovely. I apologize for that. I didn't quite get to my microphone switch in time. All right, let me go back and read that again with apologies. The concept of the inner images derives from psychology. Brain scientist Gerald Hunter calls inner images all that which is hidden behind the visible surface of living beings and steers their actions. Similarly, Jung believed that archetypal images exist in our consciousness, which are manifestations of the pure forms of archetypes, which are unknowable. In chemistry, a molecule doesn't do anything that isn't allowed by a waveform, an inner image of one of the virtual states. In life, a human being does nothing that isn't allowed by an inner image of the mind. There is an equivalence of the mental and the physical. Psychology is the physics of the mind. Sorry, this is the money sentence. So let me get it right for you. But I'm having some issues here. Psychology is the physics of the mind. Quantum physics is the psychology of the universe. I thought that was pretty interesting. Um, so I wrote beside that paragraph. Whoa, whoa, wow. Okay, so I'll read it once more, those last two phrases. Psychology is the physics of the mind. Quantum physics is the psychology of the universe. Uh, and Dan says, I don't think Newton even considered non-Euclidean geometry. Probably not. Uh, yeah, we don't know what dark energy is either. Fire. So let me see. Dan says, I don't, okay. Nick says that it's nice, Winston's mom. Very often, the utility of mundane things, a fan, a jug, rests on the empty space they encapsulate. And the fire gave me a blessing for my sneeze, I guess. Uh, Winston's mom says, Nick Chan, maybe I should take a closer look at some of those famous still life paintings that I tend to move past on my way to the oil portraits. Or Dan says, dark energy is basically energy that they can't understand or even be sure exists yet. Uh, yeah, I already Googled it. It doesn't interact with light. So, like how they measure it with sound. Um, well, they measure it because of what it does to the rest of the universe, and they have to assume it's there because of what it does. Uh, if even infrared light cannot be used, okay, I'm not following that. Info overdose says yes because physics describes um, how the universe works, and physiology how the mind works. Nick Chance hit the at sign and type in my name. I am on a Chrome, so that's how I tag you and check to see if you have live chat enabled. Top chat drops comments. Okay, let me change this to uh, live chat, maybe. All right. All right. I've changed it to live chat instead of top chat. I hope that that's helpful for everyone. And if not, please let me know in the chat. Okay, so going on. Quantum wave functions are archetypes. It is no accident that the development, let's see, okay, that the development of psychology as a science took a quantum leap after 1900, when the era of the classical sciences came to an end and the quantum era began. So he's saying that we've been out of Newtonian physics for 120 years. I think that a lot of physicists would um, quote Mark Twain, who said rumors of my death are exaggerated, but nonetheless, it is an issue. All right, so Jung's view of the human psyche presupposes a structure of the universe that is in perfect agreement with the quantum universe, but impossible in Newton's world. For example, Jung's assumption that an invisible part of the world exists, which doesn't consist of material things, but of forms, the archetypes, is unacceptable in a Newtonian universe in which all phenomena depend on the properties of matter. Jung's collective unconscious is a non personal part of the human psyche. It is a realm of forms, the archetypes, which can appear spontaneously in our consciousness and act in it, influencing our imagination perception, and thinking. The archetypes are typical modes of apprehension, which shape, regulate, and motivate the conscious forms in our mind in the same way in which the virtual states of atoms and molecules shape and control empirical phenomena. We must constantly reach into the realm of the archetypes and actualize their virtual forms in order to be able to live and to give meaning to life. And so here I would recommend you take a look at a couple of books by Jean Shinoda Bolen. One is called Gods in Every Man, and the other is Goddesses in Every Woman. Now, basically, what Dr. Bolen does in those two books is she describes eight of the Greek gods in terms of what their features are, and says these apply to you so that you can find out which Greek god is influencing you. And those Greek gods, so-called, are actually archetypes that force you to do this or that. And so in men in the late teens and early 20s, often the warrior archetype constellates, which means that you have to go out and fight for something. It doesn't mean in battle necessarily. It could be fighting for your ideas in software development or something like that. But you have to do it sort of in a warrior mode. And that's why all the hero movies like Star Wars that we're going to start seeing from this weekend have the male character constellating the archetype of the warrior. And meanwhile, in late teens and early 20s, it's very common for women to have a child. And when they have a child, then the mother archetype takes over. And things that, in both cases, things that you never imagined you can do, you can do. And the George C. Scott character in the movie Patton basically summed it up for the warrior archetype in the opening speech of that movie, which you can probably find on YouTube quite easily. So it'd be the opening speech from Patton. And in that speech, George C. Scott says, when you put your hand into a bunch of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, then you'll know what to do. Okay, so that's the warrior archetype. And once something like that happens to you, you are definitely a warrior. And, I have had such things happen to me. I had a Marine die in my arms one time. And I ended up staying in the Marines for another 20 years after that, partially because of that, probably. And in the case of women, when you have a child, there's no going back. Once you're a mother, you're a mother. And, in my case, if I still maintain my commission, and even though I've been retired since 1991 from the Marines, I still retain my commission, and I can wear my uniform if I wish to. And if I were called to serve, I would serve. And so that archetype never goes away, even though it's invisible. And even though if you didn't know that I was a Marine, you wouldn't have guessed it from anything I've said here tonight, other than this last 5 minutes. Winston's mom Um, says understanding the cognitive functions as they relate to our shadow functions is very helpful in finding our balance or reaching our anima to our animus, Senate archetypes. We oldish law. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not quite following here. Senex, puer and senex is um, the traditional opposite. Um, the cavalier young man is the puer, and the senex is the old guy who's been around the block a few times. And Fire says the movie patent movie clip America's Love a Winner. Yep, that's the speech, right? So it's only about 3 minutes long. It's worth listening to. And I can tell you when I first saw that movie, I was actually in Vietnam, and I found it quite motivating at the time. So we have described above how molecules are guided in their actions by the waveforms of their quantum states, like by inner images. Since the inner images control all the processes of the world, they must have guided to the evolution of life. In this way, biological evolution appears primarily not as an adaptation of life forms to their environment, but as the adaptation of minds to increasingly complex forms, archetypes in the cosmic potentiality. In our minds, the cosmic forms appear as thoughts. In the physical reality, they appear as material structures. We can understand the world because the forms within our mind and the structures in the world outside both derive from the same cosmic source. It makes sense to think that all of reality is like the reality of the atom. That is, behind the visible surface of things, there is a realm of invisible forms which have the potential to appear in the empirical world and act in it. As pointed out above, we can think of this realm like of an ocean whose waves are hanging together and are mind-like, so that the universe now appears as an indivisible wholeness, and consciousness is a cosmic property. Now, I just mentioned the Higgs boson, which um, we in the Europeans spent $17 billion building the super collider at CERN, 17-mile circumference super collider. And part of the purpose of that device was to determine whether the Higgs boson, which Dr. Higgs had identified mathematically, actually existed. And what they proved in 2016, I think, is that the Higgs boson actually does exist, but that doesn't mean it is always existing and it was winging around CERN. It means that there were zillions of potentials there, and because of the great energy that was developed in the super collider, they were able to make the Higgs boson show up once, or not more than once maybe, but anyway, they're pretty sure that the Higgs boson exists. That and 50 cents, or no, that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee today, so I don't know. So Winston's mom, Ura, allow me to thank you for your service, sir. I was enlisted, so I shall now call you sir, Skip, with a salute. Well, it's not necessary. And, to me, it gets to be a little bit too much to be constantly thanked for my service. I was uh, thanked. I was welcomed home after Vietnam by my family, and I was thanked very well because I had GI Bill that paid for both law school and business school for me. And to this day, I have health care covered because of my service and the fact that I earned it in a career in the Marines. And so I feel that I'm thanked uh, quite a lot by the way things work in the military and in the reserve forces. And, okay, in the 60s, there were a few examples of men who came back through, I think, Los Angeles and possibly San Francisco from Vietnam who were spit upon. And there were cases of that. I know men that happened to. But in general, I didn't have the impression in the 60s that military people were truly disrespected. I mean, maybe there were some young people that were getting a little bit over the top in their behaviors in the anti war movement, but most people were quite respectful. And, and those people that were anti war protesters back then and extremely left wing today are the people that are going to be keeping the president in office, and so extremely conservative. So it's just really weird the way it works. But because of enantiodromia, which is the tendency of things to turn into their opposite, um, things work out in a peculiar sort of way. For me, I was not particularly a I was not a Marine because I had a very strong right wing attitude about life. I was the son of a naval officer, and so it was the family business. And I was always going to go in the military and serve as an officer. So it never occurred to me whether my politics was right wing or left wing. It was patriotic, certainly. Um, but I'm convinced of the patriotism of the people who were protesting. Also, I mean, my um, best friend in life is also was the son of a naval officer, and he went to Canada and he never came back. And he's still my best friend in life, and I can't change that. And so. Um, I admit that at the time that he went to Canada, I was rather surprised, um, but only briefly because I was pretty busy worrying about my own bottom during that time. Um, and so, was it MacDill in '91? Where did you retire from prior to that? I was at Langley. Okay, you must be talking to Winston's mom because those are Air Force bases, and my family were military Army officers all the way back to Charlemagne. I was the first female and the first enlisted. I went to finish my degrees. So um, hopefully the GI Bill did help you finish your degrees as it did me. Um, but anyway, yeah, as I think probably for Winston's mom and for me too, it's a family business, and if it's what your father does, it's natural for you to have a tendency to go do that. And even though my father never encouraged me, I mean, he never urged me to go in the military, and when I called him up and told him I'd joined the Marines on March the 7th, 1967, I think he was a bit surprised. But, um, and And Nick says, I was in the military for 2.5 years, mandatory where I'm from. It's quite an effective kind of initiation into the culture. Here, not saying whether that's good or bad. Um, yeah, and thank goodness for health insurance. Well, I think, in retrospect, in the old days, I thought the draft was bad, but given those times and the fact that they were building up the military for the Vietnam War, that was the only choice they had. And they've changed things quite a bit. I mean, even though, um, nowadays military officers are paid quite well and very close to the way civilians are paid. And are other benefits. And so what I never realized in the military was that my family was poor. I can remember a couple of moves where we were moving on less than $20 in our pockets, but all things were taken care of, like the cost of our move and lots of other things were taken care of, and prices were cheaper then. So, but I do recall one occasion when my brother thought the movers had stolen his $13 that he'd saved up over a 2-year period. Let's say he was 10 years old. Um, and he got it paid back, I think, 5 years later, when my mother admitted that she'd raided his wallet because she needed the money to do the move. And but anyway, it I never noticed it because we always had clubs to go to, and we had special services for swimming and boating and everything that you could want to do in the civilian life. So, um, and as I say, I got to go to a graduate school. So, appearance of the archetypes in our mind shows our connection with a transpersonal order beyond the narrow confines of our personal psyche. Jung pointed out the collective unconscious is, quote, a boundless expanse full of unprecedented uncertainty, with apparently no inside and no outside, no above and no below, no here and no there, no mine and no thine, no good and no bad, where I am indivisibly this and that, where I experience the other in myself and the other than myself experiences me. There I am utterly one with the world, so much a part of it that I forget all too easily who I really am. I thought that was a really beautiful statement that comes from Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, volume 9-1 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, which you can find in our Dropbox if you haven't gotten. If you haven't gotten access to our Dropbox, write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and I will give you access. And in there you will find many treasures. I won't be talking about which, but many. And so let's see. So he goes on. Idealists, philosophers, and mystics have pursued such ideas through the ages. In the 19th century, for example, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel taught that absolute spirit is the primary structure of the universe. Everything that exists is the actualization of spirit, and everything is connected with it. Spirit is everything, um, creates everything, and thinking and being, subject and object, the real and the ideal, the human and the divine are all one. Thus, Hegel concluded, our thinking is the thinking of the cosmic spirit, who is thinking in us. Thousands of years prior to Hegel, the Indian sages invented the allegory of the water pots, which are filled with water and placed into the sun. You can see the sun in each one of them, but there is only one sun. Similarly, you can find consciousness in countless human minds, but there is only one consciousness, the cosmic consciousness. And I'll just mention one name here, which I'll put in the chat, which is Donald Hoffman. Okay, and so he, if you look him up and find his TED Talks and such, he has done a lot of talks about which came first, the material world or the psyche, and he says consciousness came first. Um, uh, so that comports with what we're reading here. So the word consciousness derives from the Latin con and scientia, and it means a state of knowing together. Interestingly, when we speak of our consciousness and that of other people, we always speak of our consciousness and never use the plural form, speaking of our consciousnesses. There is no plural form because there is only one consciousness, the cosmic consciousness. If our personal consciousness is merely a part of the cosmic system, it isn't amazing that archetypes can appear in our mind and act in it. By the way in which it describes the world, quantum physics has taken science into the center of ancient spiritual teachings. For example, molecular wave functions have no units of matter or energy. They are pure non-material forms. The same is true of Jung's archetypes. Like the wave functions of quantum systems, they are pure non-material forms. In Aristotle's metaphysics, all things are mixtures of matter and form. There was only one pure form, God. The name that quantum chemists have given the empty states of atoms and molecules, that is, calling them virtual states, is a peculiar expression, and one wonders where it is coming from. As it turns out, the concept wasn't invented by quantum chemists, but by Meister Eckhart, a medieval Dominican monk and mystic. The visible things are out of the oneness of the divine light, Meister Eckhart wrote, and their existence in the empirical world is due to the actualization of their virtual being. What a stunning phenomenon. The same unusual term appears in the mind of medieval mystic, and then, hundreds of years later, in the mind of a quantum chemist. The example shows that absolute truths can appear again and again with the same messages through thousands of years in different minds, different ages, and different parts of the world. It is difficult to avoid the impression that our minds are connected to a cosmic realm of thoughts, the realm of Jung's archetypes. Jung's archetypes and the wave functions of quantum states are so similar that we could think of the archetypes as the virtual state functions of our mind, and we could speak of the virtual quantum wave functions as the archetypes of the physical reality. Because they have never been in consciousness before, the archetypes appear out of a non-empirical realm of the world. For each one of us, the birth of a conscious self is out of a realm of non-empirical forms, in the way in which the birth of the empirical world is out of the realm of virtual states. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that two families of forms have their home in the same cosmic realm, that is, in the realm of the cosmic consciousness. That the world inside and outside ourselves rests on a transcendent background is as certain as our own existence, says Jung. Okay, let me go back and look here. War is sweet to those who have not experienced it, says Erasmus. Yes. And, Jung commented that when he was in Scotland on the first day of World War One, and he had five visions before World War One, which he thought might be indicating that he was having a psychotic episode. But what he was having was an experience of the collective unconscious, and it actually helped him discover the collective unconscious. But and so on August the 1st, 1914, he said he was the happiest person in the world because when the war started, he knew he wasn't crazy. But on the way back to Switzerland, he had to pass through enemy lines and through a lot of towns, and people were having festivals, and everybody was so happy about the war starting and so on. But, you know, that was short-lived once the machine guns started going. Winston's mom says, Nietzsche describes the crowd as a herd mentality, explains why the grass often seems greener. Absolutely. Have you read a book about DMT? I don't know what DMT is. You read very well and have a lovely, pleasant voice. Thank you. Winston's mom. In Theosophy and Anthroposophy, the Akashic records are a compendium of all human events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent, even to have occurred in the past, present, or future. Well, that's very interesting. They are believed by theosophists to be encoded in a non-physical plane of existence known as the etheric plane. And Nick says, let's not forget Kekule's dream of the snakes that led him to benzene's molecular structure. And that is correct. But a different topic, I want to go back to the Theosophists for a minute because Krishnamurti, Jimmu Krishnamurti, emerged from the Theosophists in Madras. He was discovered by Amy, what's her name? Besant, Mrs. Besant. I can't remember her first name. I think it's Annie Besant, but anyway, she discovered Krishnamurti on the beach with his brother when he was 12 years old, and she was impressed by the aura that was around his head, and so she took him in and trained him up, sent him to Cambridge, I believe, and sold him basically as the new Messiah. And so on his 33rd birthday, about 21 years later, he was at a convention of Theosophists in Netherlands, and there were Theosophists from all over the world present, and they were expecting him to give a great speech and to claim the mantle of being the Messiah at that time. And he got up and he said, I'm nobody's Messiah. I don't want any followers. And, I'm just a man and I don't want any followers whatsoever. And the result was that he had followers for the rest of his life and couldn't get away from it, even though he disclaimed messiahhood. But he obviously was quite a spiritual man and said a lot of great things. There are lots of great Krishnamurti quotes. And so let's see. So Kyle says DMT is a chemical in psilocybin mushroom and ayahuasca. Okay. Also natural chem and brain. Okay. After Jordan Peterson's experiences with psilocybin, I think I would tend to stay away from those things. And, in my um, personal, pretty close relationships. Um, we've lost 3 young people to the drug epidemic. And it's quite tragic when it happens. Um, and so I urge you that you should rethink your thinking if you're using any of these drugs, uh, except under a very strict uh, protocol with a professional mental health expert. And obviously, Jordan Peterson is such an individual. I don't think he prescribes drugs, but he's obviously a clinical psychologist. And even with his knowledge, he ended up addicted and had to get um, detoxed. And I don't know where he stands now, but it was a close thing. Winston's mom says Helena Blavatsky was the founder of the Theosophical movement. In the late 19th century, Blavatsky claimed she learned of the records from Tibetan monks who said the records could be found in the Akasha or ether, a reference to the space element in Eastern 5 element systems. And Kyle says, I was mental before drugs. Well, I'm not a mental health professional. And so, if drugs have helped you, uh, more power to the professionals who helped you with that. But I can't recommend it, and I've only seen tragedy around such things, and so I I urge you to be very careful about these things. And so, anyway, going on to point 8 here in this essay, I think we're bringing in on the end. Really. Okay, synchronicity in the mind-like background of the universe. Carl Gustav Jung is primarily recognized as a revolutionary psychiatrist and psychotherapist. However, the aspects of the psyche that he discovered are so profound that they go beyond the limited concerns of the human psyche, making it possible to think, for example, that the universe itself is conscious and our own consciousness is connected with the cosmic consciousness. In Jung's theories, the concept of synchronicity plays an important role. Jung's German term, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, means a coincidental according to meaning. It usually is translated as meaningful coincidence, referring to the coincidence of the 2 or more events, and it describes phenomena in which an event in the external world coincides meaningfully with the psychological state of the mind. That is, 2 or more events are connected in meaning, but not in their visible causes. As Jung in paragraph 838, or is that 858 of Mysterium, I believe, describes it in the simultaneous appearance of synchronistic events, something other than the probability of chance is involved. Specifically, synchronicity consists of 2 factors. An unconscious image comes into consciousness either directly, i.e., literally, or indirectly, symbolized or suggested in the form of a dream, idea, or premonition. And B, an objective situation coincides with this content. The one is as puzzling as the other. Now, I just mentioned, you may not know of the talk that I gave on October 27th at Unity by the Bay. So I'm going to give you the name of it in this chat. It's called Finding the Living God. And you can find it on this YouTube channel. And in that talk, I spent about the first 45 minutes to an hour talking about synchronistic events that have occurred to me. And because of those, well, let me put it simply that Jung was talking about stages of consciousness. And one of the things that so in these stages of consciousness, I'll just very quickly run through them for you. And Nick, let me show your, let's see. Okay, Nick gave the chemical description for psilocybin. And Winston's mom refers to Edgar Casey was all about the Akashic records, and Dolores Cannon carried that work forward. And I think Atlantic University in Virginia Beach, Virginia, has also been involved in that. And so I've actually visited Atlantic University, and I used to swim right across the street from it when I was a boy at Virginia Beach. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and let you continue your discussion. So let me just talk about these stages of consciousness, of which synchronicity is stage 6. So the first stage is when you're born is participation mystique, and that is you're a wild animal, you don't know anything, but you try to do what your mom does or your dad does, and so you learn in the first 2 or 3 years of life what you have to do as a human being to get yourself fed and so on. And then at about age 3, your ego starts to develop and you say no for the first time. And so when you do that, that's an indication that your ego is developing. And so at that stage of consciousness, then your parents are your gods, basically. And you see your parents as gods. In the third stage of consciousness, that's when organized religion comes in, and you project your gods onto your organized religion's description of gods, whatever that may be. In the fourth stage, we had Nietzsche. And so at the end of the 19th century, Nietzsche said, God is dead. And what he was referring to was the physical God. But he didn't make the distinction between the physical God and the psyche. And that was for Jung to come along in the next generation. And he pointed out that there is a living God, but that living God isn't outside of you, it's in you. And so the fifth stage of consciousness is to realize that you, as this article also says, are the universe's way of being aware of itself and communicating with itself and so on. And we all are kind of that. And then the sixth, and so the point about the fifth level of consciousness is that then we can go back to those old-time religions, the ones that John Vervaeke is very derisive of, because they all developed in an evolutionary fashion all over the world according to conditions in those areas. And so from a psychic point of view, they are naturally evolved systems for mental health. And so, you can either go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist for $150 a week, or you can go to your church and put $20 a week in the collection plate. Your choice, but both of them more or less serve the same function, although theologians don't necessarily understand that yet. I mean, when I said that to Paul Vanderklay one time, he was very surprised to hear me say that. But then the sixth level, and anyway, I went into this in great detail in that talk. The sixth level is synchronicity, where if you start to see synchronicities, you will see them everywhere. And when you see synchronicities that often, you understand that the universe is connected, and you can see some. They're very difficult to get photographs of. However, I have gotten actual video of a couple, and so you can see that in that talk, Finding the Living God. And then the seventh level of consciousness is Kundalini, where one learns to connect to the flowing energy of the universe. And that's above my pay grade. So you'll have to go to your local gym and find a Kundalini instructor to help you connect with that. But there is a book. I happen to have it within arm's reach. C.G. Jung, the Psychology of Kundalini Yoga. And so it's quite a good book. And I've talked about it in this group before, so there's video about it on the YouTube channel, and you can go ahead and find that. Now, just going back quickly. And Winston Mom is recommending a meditation. And I would say that that's a very good idea. I go to a Buddhist meditation class every week, and it's a way to move your ego mind aside and let your deep unconscious, yourself, communicate with you. And so what I've found recently, and this is very recent, but one good way of meditating is to do calligraphy. So I've written, and some of you know this, but I've written quite a number of poems. You can find those in the Dropbox, but I have started to take these poems and turn them into calligraphy. So this is one that I completed this morning, and it's not quite the way I want to present it yet. It's a little bit too big, and it doesn't separate out the verses of my poem. But as you're doing the calligraphy, I find that that's a very good method to meditate, because it causes you to focus the mind. And the point is that you can learn things from your unconscious that you really need to know. Let's see here. Buffalo Con. So Winston's mom says synchronicity is a very real thing. I've found that certain moments in my life just remained with me. Movie moments, quotes, a visual or memory will have a meaning later in my life with hindsight. Absolutely. And you know, these things come into your mind all the time. When a memory comes up in your mind, you need to pay attention to that. You know, I get memories from 60 years ago all the time. Buffalo Khan says, I only once ever felt my kundalini. It was crazy, like a garden hose turning on. Yes, it's very intense, as I'm told. And Winston's mom, Buffalo Khan, did you seek your awakening, or was it something that knocked unexpectedly at your door? Door being another symbol in my life. And Nick says, yes, but I should be doing it more, just basic 10-minute sit, shut up. Was very heavy into bin beats, so they distract from simple meditation for me. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you can meditate to music and so on. And Nick asked me, how long did it take me to do that calligraphy? Okay. What you may not know is that I have given a number of members of this group um, this as a Christmas card this year. This is called The Eternal Moment. And it took me 2 months to do this one page. Okay, now why did it take 2 months? Well, I never had done calligraphy before, so I had to learn it from a book. And so it took me 2 months to sort of work out how to do each letter and then to position it properly. And so I actually started a watercolor page like this at least 15 times before I got to the bottom. In other words, I spoiled 15 earlier versions of this before I got to the bottom. And so if you would like a copy of this, I think I did put it in the Dropbox, and you can simply print it out from a week or two ago. But if you would like a cardstock copy of it like this, then send me an email and I'll arrange it. I'll need your snail mail address. But let me, for those of you that don't know what the eternal moment is, this is a quote from Dr. Jung's Visions lectures from the early 1930s. And it's a quote that's not very commonly known. And I spotted it and I was very moved by it. So here's what it says. The great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment. And if you do not realize it, you have missed the best part of life. You have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of life, contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this eternal moment. One should take each moment as the eternal moment, as if nothing were ever going to change, not anticipating a faraway future. For the future always grows out of that which is. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. C.G. Jung. Okay. So anyway, so this I did in Gothic calligraphy, and this one I did in Chancery. So there are two different styles of calligraphy, and this one I did in just overnight last night and this morning. I had already written the poem 26 years ago. And here's another one. This, again, still isn't in the form that I want it to be because it's too crowded. But it's called Resting Travelers. See if I can read it. Resting travelers in secret rendezvous, recall scarlet passions changing their lives. I'm happy today because I love you. sultry afternoons on islands in view, our dimming minds to recall how love drives resting travelers in secret rendezvous. We weathered the storms, though the hurricanes blew, the grove of bamboo we planted still thrives. I'm happy today because I love you. Whatever other may not continue, always remember how our love revives resting travelers in secret rendezvous. Someday you'll read this. I'm happy you knew through all of the ages, love always thrives. I'm happy today because I love you. Beyond the sting of our final adieu, remember our love beyond death revives resting travelers in secret rendezvous. I'm happy today because I love you. So, but as I did it, I somehow smooched the red ink, and so this is only an interim example. But by focusing on doing the calligraphy, one meditates. That's what it is. So let's see. Yeah, Winston's mom says, imagine how the monks must have felt when the Gutenberg press came along and suddenly 2 months' work or worth of work, all for free. Yeah, that's the issue. But I'm sure the monks were quite happy because they had the experience that I've had with it. Thank you for suggesting hitting the like button. I really appreciate that. Don't hesitate to hit the super chat button too. This is 3.5 years work on this channel, and believe it or not, I mean, I remember the young woman who went up to YouTube when they increased the requirements for how you get monetized on a YouTube channel, and so it made it more difficult for her to be monetized, and she went up and started shooting at people. And so you can imagine my surprise when I finally got over 1,000 subscribers, which is one of the two major thresholds. And I found out that I was getting paid like $10 a month, something like that, for all the work that went into the process. So nobody is getting rich on YouTube channels except YouTube, and you have to find other ways to live. Fortunately, I'm semi-retired, so I'm able to live and do what I like. So hint to Skip's family, put an antique feather pen in Skip's stocking and an inkwell. Calligraphy will be even more meaningful with elegant instruments. Well, it so happens that Skip has arranged for that stocking. So here's a Confucius Fude pen, which I got from Amazon, and here's purple ink. I'm into purple these days, like my shirt and so on, because I want my fellow Americans to start seeing one another in purple rather than red or blue. But anyway, I'm going to wrap those and give them to my wife to put into my stocking. So I take no chances on such things. Nick says, don't mean to sound lame, Skip, but it's amazing how you keep everything straight in line. But I guess doing it slowly helps. Still amazing though. Well, I'll tell you what the secret is. The secret is I very pedantically draw pencil lines on the watercolor paper, and then after I pen in the poem, then I erase the pencil lines. And amazingly, even if you go over it the pencil lines will go away pretty much. I mean, I realized when I was looking at my red book yesterday that Dr. Jung didn't even bother to erase his pencil lines in a lot of cases. So, trying to catch. So Buffalo Con says, I'm so happy to have found this. I've been trying to catch up on all the vids. I had no idea who Jung was until a week ago. I woke up in the middle of the night in trance-like state and started painting, and your red book started playing, and it made so much sense to me and fits with so much of my experience and explains it in a way to be able to share my experiences. Great. Um, well, you won't be able to catch up on all the vids because there's now over 1,000 of them on this channel. Believe it or not, even I'm astounded. But nonetheless, there are more than 1,000 videos on this channel, and so the best way to get into Dr. Jung's work is just dive in and swim like hell. That's the best way. And Winston's mom said, I agree. And our sacred chakra is a lovely shade of purple. I will practice reading auras later and see if you're auric, lilac, or lavender. So, by the way, one thing I did notice is that on the Finding the Living God tape or video, my aura does show very dramatically throughout that video, and so you can see it. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, in an aura is like a halo that painters used to put around Christ, for example. And it's an actual thing because we've been talking about quantum physics, and your body doesn't just end at the end of your flesh. There's orbits of electrons and so on that go on around your body, and if you're sensitive to them, you can actually see these auras quite easily. And the way I always suggest people look for it is you simply hold your hands up like this, and preferably against a wall that's one color, and just move your fingers up and down. And as you do that, you'll literally see the aura between your fingers. And as you move it up and down, you'll see the aura go back and forth as you're moving your fingers. And so it's quite dramatic. And knowing about it, I'd never have gotten anything out of it other than I know to pay attention to it, and have paid attention to it for most of my life now. I probably saw them first when I was maybe in the 4th grade. So I don't know if my aura is purple. It could be. Yeah, another way is to hold a ruler on the paper and write on top of the ruler. See, easy that way. Okay, you must be talking about how to stay straight on calligraphy. You just have to be careful you don't smooch the ink. And she says, Robert Thurman, Tibet House, has a very strong aura to practice on. Do you listen to Tibet House? Well, no, I don't. But Robert Thurman is a very famous Buddhist teacher, and his daughter is Uma Thurman. So it's a famous family. And Buffalo Con said, when I see auras, they're like onion layers that wave out. Yes, I sometimes see it in inanimate objects as well. Yes, inanimate objects also have auras because it's quantum physics again. All right, so let me see if I can wrap this up. We've seen above that the phenomena of quantum physics force us to conclude that reality appears to us in two domains. There is the domain of the empirical, energetic, material things, the realm of the actuality of the visible phenomena. However, in addition, behind the visible surface of things is a hidden, invisible, and non empirical domain that doesn't consist of things but of non material and non empirical forms, the realm of the potentiality of the universe. You could think that the visible world is something like the consciousness of the universe, while in the hidden part is its unconscious. And so, if you've never looked at an aura before and you see one tonight, that would represent a potentiality because you've seen them, now you've seen them, and the potential to see them was always there in your lifetime, but you didn't see them, and now you can see them, and you'll never forget it. We have said that the non-empirical forms in the cosmic realm of potentiality are real because they have the potential to appear in the empirical world and act in it. They can do this in two ways. They can appear as thoughts and images in our conscious mind and as material structures and events in the external world. When one and the same form appears at the same time, both as a thought and as an external event, a mental process and an empirical occurrence express the same meaning, and we experience a synchronistic event. In a Newtonian world, such events are impossible. In a quantum world, they must occur. We can't know what causes such events because their causes, if any, are not empirical. However, we can understand that synchronistic events are possible because the universe is an indivisible wholeness that is aware of its processes, like a cosmic spirit. Thus, we are led again to Hegel's thesis that a cosmic spirit is thinking of us. And so in that video of Finding the Living God, I did put a couple of my videos of my own synchronistic experiences, and they're quite profound. And it's quite obvious that, especially the one that involves the Navy Blue Angels, that could not have been planned by any human being, even if you wanted to do it. So the lack of visible causal connections is an interesting aspect of synchronistic events. However, in the same way in which quantum events seem random, but are really caused by some non-empirical processes. So the randomness of synchronistic events is only an apparent randomness. The cosmic spirit is unfathomable, but not arbitrary or mindless. Okay, synchronicity. Okay, so synchronicity can involve more than a single mind and more than a few events. In the early 1900s, for example, Europe went through an era of revolutionary changes, which affected all aspects of life and show all the characteristics of synchronistic events. In 1900, for example, Sigmund Freud invented psychoanalysis, and Max Planck founded quantum physics. In 1903, Henry Ford founded the Ford Motor Company, and the Wright brothers succeeded in the first human motor flight. In 1905, Albert Einstein developed relativity theory, and in Paris, the first modern art show presented paintings by André Derain and Henri Matisse. In 1907, Cubism was developed by Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso. In 1910, Arnold Schoenberg wrote the first composition of atonal music. In 1912, Vasily Kandinsky invented abstract painting. In 1913, Franz Kafka published his short stories. In 1914, James Joyce wrote The Dubliners, and the First World War began. And in 1917 was the year of the Russian Revolution. All of these developments were revolutions in their corresponding fields. We perceive a synchronistic connection between these revolutions because they had a common meaning. That is, each one of them took a given field away from the visible surface of things into a hidden abstract and more fundamental realm of the world. For example, in quantum physics, for example, when quantum physicists discovered the non-empirical realm of the world, the painters of modern art began to search for the essence of things behind their visible surface. And psychologists discovered the hidden power of the unconscious. As Werner Hoffmann explains in his fascinating book, Painting in the 20th Century, paintings became evocative and stopped being reproductive. When physicists abandoned the notion of the eternal point, like particle in quantum physics, the visual artists abandoned in abstract painting the infinite point of perspective, which was the cornerstone of all classical paintings. In Infinite Potential, the reader can find additional facts which show in a stunning way that the cultural and political revolutions that rocked Europe in the early 20th century consist of a sequence of synchronistic events. There was little physical contact or direct communication between the various pioneers of that time. The physicists, for example, didn't invent the phenomenon of quantum physics by pondering the paintings of the modern artists. Modern art wasn't invented by artists while they listened to atonal music. Rather, the different minds were connected in the wholeness of a mind-like background of the cosmic potentiality. The cosmic spirit was at work in a synchronistic process. By guiding the processes of our mind, the cosmic potentiality was shown in its mind-like properties. The mental isn't fractured in the universe in isolated islands, but its thoughts form an ocean of thoughts that fills the entire world. And I would just mention David Bohm's comment that physics is unbroken wholeness in flowing, constant flowing motion. And so just think of that the world is really that everything is moving, right down to every atom in your body. And so it's unbroken wholeness and constant flowing motion. Uh, let's see, there are some videos now on YouTube where you can walk inside of a Monet or a Matisse. It's like virtual reality, especially if you play the right music, like Claire de Lune. Yeah. And Nick says, I understand, and that's exactly what many cello teachers tell their exceptional female students too. That's interesting. I used to be a cello player many years ago. Um, and So, but Nick, what I'm talking about, the Blue Angels, I'm talking about an event that occurred when I was reading from Answer to Job, and they flew over at exactly the right moment. And it so happened that I caught it on video, and you can see my reaction to it. And in terms of modern art, um, I had my experience in the Boston Museum of Art where I saw Jackson Pollock drip painting for the first time. And um, I had never thought much about drip paintings up until then. Like everyone, I'd seen postcards of them. And I said, well, any kindergartner can do that. But when you see one in real life, it might change your life as it did. And that's also on that same video that I spliced it all together so you can find it in one place in that one video. Uh, so Nick makes a comment to Buffalo Khan. I used to be bothered by people constantly knocking on my door until I realized the knocking was coming from inside the house. Then I relaxed. Well, the funny thing is that relates to a famous Rumi poem that um, that Coleman Barks translated 30 or 40 years ago. Uh, and it was something like, "There's knocking on the door. I open it. I've been knocking from the inside," or "I'm knocking on the door. I open it. I've been knocking from inside." So anyway, okay. So what I didn't get to here was conclusions, and that is another 3 pages long, and I'm going to leave that to you to find this. You can either write to me if you don't have a copy handy, or you can get admitted to our Dropbox. I've put it on the Dropbox several weeks in a row, so you can find it there. And so, okay, so Nick, in terms of the Blue Angels event, it actually wasn't the Blue Angels. It was actually a flight of F-18s, but it was fleet F-18s from Oceana. And what happens is they fly over the Navy football games, and I happen to live in Annapolis, and so on Saturdays in the fall they were flying right over my house, and so I happened to be reading between paragraph 746 and 747 of Answer to Job, and I'd urge you to take a look at those paragraphs. And right at the end of 746 is when they flew over, and then the very next thing that I was to read was this in paragraph 747. And the reading begins, by the way, with the words, "Something empirically demonstrable comes to our aid." And so that's the first sentence in this video. 2 minutes later is when the empirically demonstrable F-18s fly over my house. and I'm right at the beginning of paragraph 747. And so you can just see this work on me unconsciously for a period of a couple of minutes. But then, since the apocalypse, we now know again that God is not only to be loved, but also to be feared. He fills us with evil as well as with good. Otherwise, he would not need to be feared. And because he wants to become man, the uniting of his antimony must take place in man. This involves man in a new responsibility. He can no longer wriggle out of it on the plea of his littleness or nothingness. For the dark God has slipped the atom bomb and chemical weapons into his hands and given him the power to empty out the apocalyptic vials of wrath on his fellow creatures. Since he has been granted an almost godlike power, he can no longer remain blind and unconscious. He must know something of God's nature and of metaphysical processes if he is to understand himself and thereby achieve gnosis of the divine. And you can learn more about all of that in that talk that I gave, Finding the Living God. And Nick likes the first line, I think, that I read. Okay, so this video, Winston's mom is talking about me uploading the videos, but these videos get uploaded automatically. In other words, as soon as I hang up here, YouTube will render this video and it will make it available within an hour or so. And most of the time, the chat is available still on the video, but sometimes it's lost, I'm sorry to say. Um, but you can always write to me. And so I will again put my email address for anybody who's new and may not have seen it. And you can do that because you want to have access to the Dropbox or something like that. And so the fire, welcome. I'm glad you're here, and uh, we'll see what we can learn from one another over time. I'm only here to try to learn from everyone else too. Um, Nick says, I can imagine and look forward to seeing so much art for real. When I saw Van Gogh in Amsterdam, I was blown away by the dimensionality of the brushstrokes. Uh, could feel Vincent palpably. And I would just say then, Nick, that um, Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh, as he's commonly referred to in the U.S., is one of my favorite people. And there's a uh, his spirit is still very much with us in many ways. But there's a Penguin paperback book which is called the Letters of Vincent van Gogh, and it is all of the letters that Vincent wrote to his brother Theo. Unfortunately, um, Vincent didn't save Theo's letter, so we only have Vincent's side of the correspondence, but he wrote to his brother every 2 or 3 days for a period of like 10 years. And I found when I completed reading that book that I knew Vincent van Gogh better than my own brother. And it's just a phenomenal tour de force on top of all his amazing art. And of course, um, you know, don't think, if you've never gone to a museum, don't think that you've seen art until you actually see it in its real life, because it can be totally decapitating. And as I was talking about the Pollock, um, I walked into a gallery with um, Jackson Pollock's number 31, um, and I immediately burst into tears, and I didn't know why for 20 years, until finally I was in one of these sessions at Sammy's Italian Pizza Kitchen, and and Bill, my friend Bill, who's in our local group, uh, said just 2 words that connected that experience of me sobbing for about 10 minutes uh, in the Boston Museum, um, to why it happened, and I'll leave it to you to find it. I mean, I've left a playlist in this channel called Religious Experiences, I think, and there's also the talk Finding the Living God, where I've given about 45 minutes worth of synchronistic experiences that I've had personally, and so that you can appreciate how profound these things can be. Um, and Buffalo's Khan says the Starry Night reminds me of how I would see auras of everything at once. Yeah, very much so. Um, and by the way, is Buffalo, New York? I went to law school up there. I know a lot of things about Buffalo. Uh, let's see. Nick, you should be able to find last week's replay without any problem. Nancy did write to me today and say that she was having computer problems and would not be able to join the webinar. And Winston's mom says, Nancy seems very smart, nice. She looked lovely that night. It was rather enjoyable not having to dress and still participating. Yeah, I just mentioned that there's a playlist now on the front page of this channel called A Christian Individuation. And in that, there are 5 videos of an interview between me and Nancy. And I would urge you to take a listen to those videos. It's really profound. And if you have any doubts, you can start with number 4 or number 5 and then work your way back. But Nancy pulled together a lot of experience and how she lost her faith in God a couple of times during her lifetime. And that's quite an admission, considering she was a spiritual director in fundamentalist churches for a period of years. And so she has a lot of good information there that people need to know. And, you know, this isn't proselytizing any religion, Christian or any other religion. So, you know, basically what I say is that all religions are true. And that's basically what Dr. Jung said in answer to Job in paragraph 752, where he said that every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche. It's not a statement of the physical world. And if you think of it in that way, then you can get out of these incessant arguments with people who say, you know, the Bible is 100% true. Well, yes, it is. It's true in at least that sense. And, you know, to a certain extent, you know, there's a lot of historical data there too. But, you know, if you pay attention, most of the miracles, the big ones that are in the Bible, come from dreams or visions in one way or another. Yeah, I'm glad you did look at the Finding the Living God fire. So I'm going to listen. Thomas says, listening to Nancy's story made me look up a book called Trust and Doubt. Absolutely. And Buffalo came to me when I was a kid in a dream. Then a few years ago, I hitched the U.S. and lived in the mountains and woods for about 4 years. And the knowledge I learned the meaning. Trusting Doubt, a former evangelical, looks at old beliefs in a new light by Valerio Tarica. And that's what we all have to do. We all have to go back and reconsider these things. And, you know, Jung, again, in these last 12 paragraphs of Answer to Job, he really sums up the task for a millennium, because in 754, he talks about the great task is maybe it's the great task that we have is, I'm sorry, oh yeah, it is 754. 754 is a paragraph that goes on for 3 pages, which is one feature of Jung's writing, but um, he says that we should bend to the great task of reinterpreting all the Christian traditions. And I would say that we have to bend to the great task of reinterpreting all religious traditions and understanding what they have done, because they actually all do the same thing, and they do the same thing that Jungian analysts do in a clinical setting. And there's probably 1,000 PhD theses in that 2 sentences that I just spoke. So, and yes, we know of the Apache chief, Cochise. So Thomas says, I find some resonances not only in my religion of origin, but in other religious paths I've studied. Absolutely. And I definitely have found that. And fortunately, I've been exposed to a lot. And so I know both their good side and their bad side. But I've come to terms with them over the years, and so if you're new here, you may not know all these stories, but a lot of them you can find if you go through the videos of these sessions and various other videos that I put on here. Thomas says the difference between sitting in Vipassana meditation and sitting in a Southern Baptist congregation is immense. Yeah, I think that Edward Edinger and I think Jung also um, pretty much summed up the difference, which is that um, the Buddhists um, focused on the self end of the spectrum, keeping in mind that there's a book called Ego and Archetype that if you haven't read, you ought to read. It's from Edward Edinger, and you can find an electronic copy on the YouTube or on the Dropbox, I think. And we have 2 centers in our life. One is the ego center, and that's our conscious mind. And then there's the self, which is everything else, and the ego center as well. And, or what Jung called the 2 million-year-old man, and I call the 3.5 billion-year-old man. But in any case, Buddhism focuses on the self end, the 2.5 million-year-old man. And Jung did largely also, which is where his interest in the Gnostics came along, because when he was talking about, when they were talking about the pleroma 2,000 years ago, and Jung talked about it, they're basically talking about nirvana from a Buddhist point of view. And the ego end is the other end, the end of suffering that includes, um, things like Joel Osteen saying that, you deserve to be rich type thing. Well, yeah, maybe, but maybe not. And I'm not sure that helps you much if you get into a real jam. So, yeah, a lot of books to read. That's one of them. That's in the 2-4B. So Buffalo Khan says he's been trying to avoid sleeping, and I would say that's not a very good idea. When I was young, I used to do a lot of that, and nowadays I can't sleep, and And so I have a lot of trouble going to sleep unless I'm in meditation class, and then I go out like that. Or in any spiritual service, I will go to sleep within 10 minutes. And in my Monday meditation class, I can be out in 30 seconds. I've become known for it. Uh, and so Winston's mom says, have you tried the 20-minute sleep cycle experiment? I have somewhere watched someone discuss this, maybe William Hoff. Well, one thing I would mention is that uh, Winston Churchill was famous for putting in an 8-hour day, then taking a 1-hour nap, and then putting in a second 8-hour day. And he, um, when World War II began, he was already 65 years old, but he put on in that 16-hour day regularly for the whole war and for most of his life, actually. And I find that if I lie down and actually go to sleep for 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, I can wake up and refreshed and go another 8 hours, which is what I've done today, as a matter of fact. So I fell asleep in my meditation class, came home and took a nap, and then I was able to go on and keep yakking like this. Um, let's see. Let's see. Winston's mom says the pineal gland is said to be stimulated by melatonin, so being in the dark must be enlightening. And I'm so confused. Well, I was urged to take melatonin when I was traveling overseas because it supposedly sets your body clock more quickly. And what I found was that when I woke up, I felt like I was inside a fishbowl. I couldn't connect with the world again. So be sensitive to what you do with melatonin and whether it can work for you. I'm not saying don't. It probably does work for most people. It just doesn't really work for me. Uh, yes, you're right, Thomas. I'm a bit tired at this point. Um, and Oh yeah, all right. Well, during my anima writing period, which was 1993, um, I was probably getting enough sleep, but my anima was literally waking me up as a vision, and waking me up every morning at 6 a.m. and making me go to my computer and forcing me to sit down and put my hand on the keyboard and turn the screen down very low so that it wouldn't wake me up, cause me to come into real consciousness, but stay in a sort of um, liminal state between sleep and awake. And that novel wrote itself, and it went on for 8 months, and I couldn't stop until it was done. And when it was done, she let me alone. And so it's, and at the time I sort of thought, wow, this must be like one of the great novelists getting, the spirit and into the spirit. But now, uh, in the fullness of time, when the Red Book was published in 2009, I realized that many of the visions I had were, if not similar to Dr. Jung's, at least comparable to them, to his visions. And so then I realized that I wasn't going crazy, and I also wasn't a great novelist, but people seem to like the novel, so it's in the Dropbox if you want to read it, uh, and it's free for you, free for the taking. Um, So, Ram Pacheco says, how are you guys doing? I love people named Pacheco, especially women named Pacheco, because I've had two surgeons, and they're both named Pacheco. Um, and one of them lifted my eyelids for me. Uh, so, and I actually saw her the other night. Um, and Thomas says, but at some point you knew you were through with the book. Yes, it was just over. I mean, I got to the end of the story and it was over, and the whole visioning thing and everything about it just went away. Um, and to this day, I have no real conscious memory of writing the book. I just know that I was being used by something that was beyond me, that was archetypal, that wanted that story to come out. Um, and My wife, who was a very uh, smart woman, um, refused to read my novel until it was done, and until I had 10 other women read it. And that was quite an amazing ask. But the reality is that I happened to work in an industry that was mostly women. And so I had lots of women around and they read it, and I never had a woman complain about what was in the novel, even though it's quite intense from, let's put it in a gentle way, in an erotic uh, sort of way. Some of the chapters are quite intense. And so I thought women would be turned off by it, but actually, I've had very positive reviews from every woman that ever gave me a review. So that's an interesting thing. So Winston's mom said, "Are you stuffy, Skip?" If you listen to Dr. Berg or Mandel on YouTube, they will help you clear your sinus, pull on your ear, push against your eyebrows, and you will feel sinus open. Um, and so I have a very small nasal passage, is the truth, Winston's mom. And I had asthma as a child and still have it a little bit, about 13%. And uh, I actually, in 1998, had a super surgery called UPPP. And in that surgery, they removed the whole back of your throat up into your nasal passages. And and because I'm allergic to everything that's green and grows, um, I'm I'm often sounding stuffy or sniffly. I'm not. I don't take Adderall like I'm told our president is an Adderall addict, but I don't do those sorts of things. But anyway, I have had this all my life. And fortunately, after my surgery in 98, I made things a lot better for me. Before that, I was having to deal with a CPAP machine, which you don't even want to know what that is, but it certainly is a kibosh on intimacy, to say the least. But I haven't had to use that since because I had sleep apnea, and I was waking up 43 times an hour on average. I was waking up because of the sleep apnea. And so after the surgery, it's better, much better. Um, and But I'll keep it in mind, press on my eyebrows, huh? And I'll think about that. Maybe I can do something about it. So, Thomas, yes. Um, it was an intense book, and living it was incredibly intense. That book is actually the autobiography of my anima, and everything in that book either happened to me personally or it happened to someone who I know intimately. And and in fact, it's mild by comparison to what would actually happen in the circumstances described. Um, and so uh, it was an intense experience because it was causing me to bring up a lot of things that I know about Japanese culture from living there 8 years, 10 years, or I'm sorry, of the 8 years, 5 years I lived while I was running a company there as an adult. And so I learned lots of facts about the Japanese shadow, let's say. And, um, and a lot of it is there in the book. Um, and I'm not a big fan of neti pots. People keep mentioning them to me, but I can't seem to get it to work right. And yeah, sleep apnea is very dangerous, and it was dangerous. My oxygen level was getting down to like 80%, which isn't red hot, and that's why I had the surgery. And it has served me well. I'm glad I did. They actually don't do that surgery anymore for some reason, but I actually don't have a uvula, the little thing that hangs down in the back of your throat. That got taken away with my tonsils and everything else that was back there, and so, but it served me well, and I still take allergy shots every 2 weeks. But this sniffling tonight is actually a cold, and I can tell the difference between allergy and cold. Um, all right, so I've been doing a lot of talking, and I think we need to call it quits. I was wondering about the next session, um, and I think what I'm going to say, since I got almost to the end of this article, and if you don't have it, I would urge you to get a copy either by writing to me or from the Dropbox. And this is the book that it relates to, Infinite Potential. And there's a very interesting passage in here. Um, I suppose I will do one thing here. Okay. On page 191 of Dr. Schäfer's book, um, there is an area called The Evil in the World. And I was planning to read this, so I'll read this as the last thing for this evening. And then there will not be another session until January the 13th, because in the course of this, I've decided not to have a session next week and the next 2 weeks. Then on the 4th of January, we're going to have a Sammy's session, so I won't be broadcasting that anymore because the broadcast video is too lousy. But I will upload the video after the event the next day or something. So the next online session like this one will be January 13th. But in order to make up for what might have come next week, let me read about Evil in the World from page 191 of Dr. Schäfer's book. No discussion of how, let's see, moral principles are archetypes in Jung's sense. Archetypes are tacit forms. They have the important function of giving meaning to life and they have the power to shape and regulate our thoughts. And herein lies a problem. Their messages depend, as Jung described it, on the state of the consciousness in which they appear. The same moral form can lead different minds to different actions, even incompatible and contradictory actions. This is a danger that we must face. The message of Jesus is a good example. In Western history, it has inspired extraordinary acts of charity, but also hideous crimes. As Jung writes, much of the evil in the world does not come from man's wickedness, but from his stupidity and unconsciousness. Many examples show that this danger is real and that it exists in our time as well as in the dark ages of the past. One is only to think of the devastating effects of prohibition in America or the 100,000 auto da fe, that's an execution device in Spain, which were caused by a praiseworthy zeal to save people's souls. Um, One could also mention um, the horrors in the Roman Catholic Church. Uh, but anyway, the biblical story of the original sin is an allegorical transcription of how evil is rooted in the unconscious. I've always thought that it is an odd sense of justice to hold someone responsible for crimes committed by others. In fact, clan punishment was the practice of the fascists in the 20th century. Instead, it is possible to think that Jung's collective unconscious is a cosmic memory field that stores all the memories of humanity, good and bad. Diogo, Valadas, Ponte, Cicero, Roy, and I presented arguments for the thesis that the human brain can transfer forms from the cosmic field into our consciousness and from our consciousness into the cosmic field. In this way, the cosmic field stores the crimes of humanity as well as the achievements. When the image of a crime appears in your mind, it functions like an original sin. But when you follow its suggestions, your responsibility is for your own actions, not for those of some archaic forebears who had yet to develop consciousness. You will find detailed arguments for the existence of a cosmic memory field in the books of Hans Peter Dürr and Erwin Laszlo. Jung's understanding of how evil arises in the world takes the process out of the archaic context of crime and punishment and divine wrath, which have lost their usefulness. There is a menacing power that lies fettered in each of us. Jung writes, only waiting for the magic word to release it from the spell. Lessons from history show that if we give in to the unconscious, everything is liable to end in destruction. This danger exists now as ever, and it is real. Jung explains, because the unconscious may reveal itself in an unexpected way at any time. As some of our recent political leaders have shown us, Jung warns mankind is still standing on the brink of actions it performs itself, but does not control. The whole world wants peace, and the whole world prepares for war, to take but one example. To the extent that the evil rules in the world, Jung writes, mankind is powerless against mankind, and the gods, as ever, show it the ways of fate. Our world is inevitably structured in polarities, and in many conflicts, the concepts of good and evil don't apply. To deal with this difficulty, our first decision must be to abstain from violence. Abstaining from violence is the principle of ahimsa, taught by the Indian sages for thousands of years. If ahimsa were adopted everywhere as the basis of our life, the world might not be a paradise, but it would be an immensely better place to live in. The importance of education in this context isn't a novel suggestion. Thousands of years ago, Socrates already taught the virtue is knowledge, taught that virtue is knowledge. And in Plato's Protagoras, we find, quote, nobody commits an evil act by their own free will, unquote, but, quote, the wrong actions rest on the lack of understanding, unquote. There is no reason to tread softly about it. It is stupid to be evil. Kant believed that to lead a virtuous life, goodwill is important. As he writes in his groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, the only thing that is good without qualification or restriction is a good will. The problem is that goodwill isn't enough. When individuals at different stages of their development can use the same moral law for conflicting actions, goodwill must be guided by additional principles. I suggest that acting in the spirit of the one, the non dual basis, is such a supporting principle. In contemporary psychology, the importance of education for the ability to lead a virtuous life is a recurring theme. For example, within the framework of his humanistic psychology, Abraham Maslow writes, the far goal of education is to aid the person to grow to fullest humanness, to the greatest fulfillment and actualization of his highest potentials, to his greatest possible stature. In a word, it should help him to become actually what he deeply is potentially. Contemporary psychology shows us that the development of a human being involves different levels of consciousness. If the consciousness is undeveloped, a person's understanding of virtue can even lead to evil acts. This is the deeper meaning of Zeno's principle. To develop our consciousness to the value best state is a primary duty because it is the basis of a virtuous life. Jung has warned us that we can't be optimistic about changing human nature. Although contemporary man believes that he can change himself without limit, he writes, the fact remains that despite civilization and Christian education, he is still morally as much in bondage to his instincts as an animal and can therefore fall victim at any moment to the beast within. To this, I like to add that while we can't change human nature, the evolution of life can do just that. And the discovery of the quantum phenomena is a sign that the appearance of a new human species is imminent. The surprising aspects of the world and the way of life that they suggest require more than a learning process to cope with. It takes a change of mind that is so fundamental that a new structure of consciousness or a metamorphosis of our consciousness is needed. Okay, so I'll just leave it at that. That was from the end of chapter 6 of Professor Lothar Schäfer's book, Infinite Potential, what quantum physics reveals about how we should live. And so, and mind you, this book was published in 2013, so nothing that he was writing about then relates to current affairs and current political officials of any kind. Um, and Tio says, hi guys, what did I miss? I think you better listen to the replay tomorrow, Tio. um, and so anyway, so we've helped Professor Schäfer because we at least have sold one more of his books. And so what I'm going to do is wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays. And I need a little bit of a rest. I've been working pretty hard on this for 3.5 years, and I'm a little run down. So there will be a advanced reading group session this Wednesday. And then that will be the last one of those until the new year. And in the advanced reading group, we will probably take on something like the Red Book in our next book that we're going to deal with. We're probably 4 or 5 sessions away from finishing Mysterium Conjunctionis. So there will be a new book that we will be beginning. We have an active advanced reading group of about 11 people that join us live every week. But there are now about 70 people in the advanced reading group who join us in replay. And so if you are interested in joining the advanced reading group, please write to me, and you'll be timely if you join during January so that you can be at the start of our next book. And we have already done the seminars on ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self, and now we're finishing Mysterium Conjunctionis. And so all of those replays are in the advanced reading group Dropbox, which is a separate Dropbox from the regular one. And so if you want to join the group, you can catch up on all of our seminars. And Winston's mom says, thank you very much. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Skip Conover viewers. I wish you all a happy New Year, Skip. I will be getting back to you on email about the Red Book. Okay, by all means, I look forward to that. I'm always responsive on email. That reminds me, though, if you don't hear back from me, that is unusual. So I get about 200 emails a day, and most of them are junk, but some of them are important. And sometimes I do miss an email from one of my subscribers. And so if you don't hear back from me within 24 hours, I'd urge you to send me another note, because I do pride myself in responding as quickly as I can. And so if you don't hear back from me, it's not because I don't like you or because because I'm not going to respond to you. I respond to everyone. Sometimes I get a few trolls who get it back in kind from me, but I do respond to everyone pretty much. And so if you don't get a response, please do write again to me until you do get one. And and Dr. Cox says, is there a separate channel for the advanced reading group? Yes, the advanced reading group is done on Zoom, and it's done on another link, which you would be provided with if you join the advanced reading group. And it also has a separate Dropbox. So all of that material does not appear on the YouTube channel. So the YouTube channel is intended to be for beginners. And, in my own experience, I've found that Dr. Jung has helped me and my mental health quite a lot in the last 32 years in many, many ways. I couldn't even begin to cover it in this session. I might talk about it once again for somebody if they want at another time, and I can go through some of the things that I've been through with it. But what I would say is that, if you don't know about Jungian psychology, you would do well to know it, because it can help you deal with the slings and arrows of life. That's what it's done for me. And I basically started this project to draw people's attention to it, because most of us can't afford $150 an hour for a Jungian analyst to to drone on with us for years and years. I mean, some people have that luxury and that privilege, and so they can um, go on and but probably 95% of us can't afford that, or can't afford a Jungian analyst to help. Um, I actually tried to find a Jungian analyst, and one of them I approached said, well, I'm afraid of you. So the problem for a Jungian analyst is that they have to get very deep down into your unconscious with you. And I don't have to do that in this because I'm at a very superficial level. But if you're in a real Jungian analysis, you're going to go very deep. And the analyst's psyche has to go down there with you. And I honestly don't know how those folks do that. Because if you have 7 or 8 hours of that a day for 7 or 8 different people, I don't know how you keep your own psyche straight. Um, but uh, if you have the money for that, terrific. Um, and but if you don't, then you can listen to these videos, and you can at least learn some things and understand some things, hopefully. And so anyway, so I've seen a few new folks here tonight, including one gentleman who has written his name in Chinese. I used to be able to read that. The second character I can read is Nama. I probably I certainly can find it, work it out. But anyway, that's another day. I studied Chinese 50 years ago, or 48 years ago. So uh, just Chabadwa the Wangwa. And that for those of you who don't speak Mandarin, it means I've forgotten almost everything. And so I've forgotten more Chinese than most people ever know. So anyway, peace. Have a happy holiday season, and I'll see you in the new year, I hope. I'm delighted we've had so many people on tonight, and I'm glad to have you here. So next session, as I said, I may have had it wrong, so I better check it again here. The next session will be January 13th. That I'll be online like this. And see you then, I hope. So peace.